John almost kissed the blue "New York, welcome to the Empire State" sign, and not because he was trying to, though he actually did have the impulse to kiss it, but because he tripped over the broken piece of metal post sticking out of the ground as he approached the sign. He caught himself before he fell onto the sign, and managed to fall onto the grass surrounding it. The crisp edges of the browning grass were rough against his fingers, but he noticed the bottom of each blade of grass had the darker shade of healthy green. He almost felt like crying at the sign of fresh growth and renewal. He hadn't taken the time to notice the grass over the past couple of days, but he'd never been so happy to be so up close and personal with it. Carl stuck his hand out to help him up, but he waved it away. "I meant to do that." "Yeah," Carl snorted, and walked away, shaking his head. John pushed himself back to his feet and walked over to where Carl stood. Carl's gray eyes were attentive as he rubbed the brim of his stained and faded Red Sox hat. His brown hair, longer than John had ever seen it, curled around the edges of his hat and the collar of his shirt. But then, John knew his own hair was the longest it had been since his junior year of high school, as it tickled at the corners of his eyes. "I never thought I'd be so happy to be in New York." "Me either," Xander agreed. John had been concerned there wouldn't be any happiness to be found after Bobby's death 2 days ago, but he actually saw smiles on the tired faces of the people surrounding him. Those smiles had been absent ever since they'd left the graveyard behind. However, he hadn't been doing any smiling either. He still couldn't get over how fast it had all happened. 1 minute Bobby had been there talking and fighting with him, and the next he was gone. He knew how fragile life was, but he'd been living with a false sense of security ever since Lee's death. He'd wrongly assumed the worst was behind them, that since they hadn't gotten sick, they would be able to fight off the sick ones, and they'd be able to make it. The worst wasn't behind them, though. He wasn't sure it ever would be. He lifted his head to study the highway winding through the mountains on either side of the road. They had hooked back up with the interstate less than a mile back, just outside of Danbury. He saw no homes around him, but vehicles were scattered across the roadway and in the grass median. "How far is it to the cabin from here?" Carl asked Al. "Normally about an hour, hour and a half. But there are a couple of bridges between here and there that could be a problem," Al answered. "I'm sure there will be more than bridges in between that will be a problem," Josh muttered. John silently agreed with him as he stared at the rocks lining the mountains on each side of them. "We should have known about the bridges," Peter grumbled. John released a low groan that caused Carl to shoot him a look. Peter hadn't said much since Bobby's death, but every time he did open his mouth, John had to fight the impulse to punch him in his face. He didn't know what would happen if they did make it to the cabin and they had to live with the guy for an extended period of time. It wasn't a pleasant proposition. He didn't understand why Bobby had lost his life while this guy was still alive and being a dick every chance he got. Life wasn't fair, he knew, but he would have traded Peter in a heartbeat for Bobby. Unfortunately, that wasn't a possibility. "We're going to run into obstacles everywhere we go," Carl said. "Bridges may be the least of our worries. Let's get back on the road." John turned and followed him to the rack-body truck. Rochelle walked by his side, her head bowed as she stared at the grass crunching beneath her feet. "We're almost there, kid," he assured her. "Are we?" she asked. That was an excellent question, but he didn't have the answer for her. "Just have to take it 1 mile at a time." She gave him a wan smile before focusing on her feet again. John draped his arm around her shoulders. He noticed a change in her since Bobby's death. He kept hoping she was just in a funk, or, as much as he didn't want to think about it, maybe it was hormones. He knew Rochelle was trying to sort through things on her own, but he kept expecting her to snap out of it. Worry that she might not began to fill him. How could she just bounce back to the stubborn and resilient girl they'd encountered on the road after everything she'd endured? "Don't leave me, kid," he pleaded silently. But he didn't know what to do to keep that from happening. She leaned against his side as he opened the door and gestured for her to jump in. John went to climb in beside her, but he felt a hand wrap around his arm. He turned to find Mary Ellen standing next to him. She nodded to the back of the truck. "What's wrong?" he asked when they were away from the others. Mary Ellen glanced at where they'd left Rochelle before turning back to him. She kept her voice pitched low while she spoke. "I know Rochelle really likes you. I think of her like a little sister," he gushed out. A small smile curved Mary Ellen's mouth as she shook her head. "I know. I didn't mean anything like that. I'm not saying she has a crush on you or anything. She simply likes you. She looks up to you, and she sees you and Carl as friends. I think she thinks of you like brothers, too. You make her laugh. Besides, if I thought you were looking at her in that way, I'd kill you."